Okay, so I've been really enjoying the summer. It's kind of in with not that it's officially begun yet, but I've been enjoying it anyway. The weather has been just totally awesome. Um, and there's like I just have so many activities just jammed packed into my daily routine. I mean, aside from going for walks and doing some camera phone photography, which I'm really getting into. I'm really liking the look I'm developing, even though it's not that original. I think I do like the aesthetic I'm trying to emulate, and getting to a point of a lot of success actually in emulating what I see and what I want to emulate in terms of artwork and subject matter and things like that. And I see a photo book developing. I see something kind of very artsy coming out of it. Artsy but not pretentious, and coming from me, there's no way it can be pretentious, um, because I do think I have a very traction, the kind of carefully, kind of even slow at some point, um, kind of a take on photography and subject matter and things like that. But I can understand how to some it might come off as kind of like a little bit too highbrow, especially coming from moi. Um, so that's taking shape, and I've been to the fifth and sixth games of the Raptors and the Warriors, and that I don't like sports. I never have. I've even as a kid, I never even really liked playing it. I mean, I lost interest in cricket real fast. When I was kind of given the opportunity to play badminton, not even in an official way, but like in the backyard of my aunt's place. I mean, I enjoyed it in this not in this sort of like, yeah, I guess I'll just do it, whatever. But I never. But yeah, the point being is I was never into sports. Attending the game though at Woody's, my favorite gay bar, was pretty interesting. I did not know lesbians were that into basketball. But they were the loudest on the fifth game. They were the loudest group in the bar. Then again, I was just sitting right next like a couple seats away from this group of lesbians, but I still think like I mean based on what I've heard and seen, they were sort of the rowdiest, most ruckus kind of group there. I just didn't know lesbians were that into basketball. Um, I mean, if there was a sport that lesbians were into, I would guess it would have been I don't know, baseball. Anyway, whatever. So it was exciting. I really enjoyed the fifth and the sixth games, especially having a few drinks and being at the bar with my friend, and kind of even getting into the game. I remember when they won in the sixth game. Obviously, I found myself in this moment where I was kind of like woo, and I thought I kind of ducked a little bit. Oh shit! Like did that just come out of me? Because I'm very reserved and I don't cheer for lowbrow things like sports. But it was exciting. And then today was the Raptors championship parade. Um, I was at basically just south of Queens Park on University Avenue, and they had this jumbotron set up, kind of like in the to the I guess to the west of City Hall, where the Raptors eventually made their thing. Um, and it was exciting too. I mean, there's lots to look at. The summer's out and everybody's happy. And yeah, lots and lots to look at. Lots of things to see, and um, and I enjoyed that very much too. I mean, it was a lot of standing, and this for an event that was attended by 2 million people. I mean, it wasn't that crazy. Like, I mean, on the when they won on this in the sixth game on Thursday night and Friday morning, especially, or Friday morning, obviously because we stayed there late. It was just more crazy. Like I saw some really crazy nuttiness going on the streets on Thursday night, Friday morning. But yeah, this parade was just very kid friendly. I mean, there were some people drinking and stuff, but it was just one guy fainted, but I think that was more maybe a combination of his drinking and being in the sun. But yeah, the thing is, I was standing like right, like next to this guy too. So I've seen him, and I've been not staring at him, but he's in my field of vision, and he looked fine. He looked completely fine, and then all of a sudden you hear somebody yelled actually fight, and then you turn to the direction of somebody yelling fight, and it's just some guy that just fainted. Like he just literally he's a pretty thick guy too. Like I mean, not fat, but he was pretty thick. He looked healthy. Let's put it that way. But yeah, he just basically went crashing to the road, like to the on the road, and some girl offered him her backpack to rest his head on. But yeah, that was strange. And then all of a sudden, he just got right back up. I guess out of embarrassment, he just tried to shake it off and look normal, and he just made his exit. And I just never saw him after that. But yeah, other than that, it was a pretty calm event. And then upon coming home or back to my friend's place, we hear the news and I'm still a bit unclear about this. I should watch the news to get some clarification, although it's not that exciting. And but it was just kind of disappointing to hear about those gunshots that were fired at Nathan Phillips Square. We weren't at Nathan Phillips Square, but it was kind of disappointing to hear the story about those. You know, I mean, I looked at the TV screen and I saw people running out of Nathan Phillips Square, and I'm thinking, wow, they must be really excited to get home. But no, it was actually because there were shots fired, and the police confiscated two weapons, and they have two people in custody. And apparently, there was some sort of stabbing thing going on at the Eden Center, which I'm unclear about. I don't know if it's related or not. I don't think maybe it's not related. Who knows? But that was disappointing to listen to. And then, of course, I kind of got back in touch with the fine arts, not talking about my photography, although I took a lot of pictures at the ROM show, in the age of Rembrandt. Um, I forget the subtitle of the show. It's something like Dutch Golden Age Painting from the Museum of Modern Art, Boston. And yeah, that was really interesting to look at. There was a lecture, um, on the same day, actually, on the sixth game on Thursday. I went to a lecture about the show before, and it was pretty amazing. It's not the best lecture I've been to in my life, but it was an interesting take on the actual pigments and materials used in creating pigments and paints and things like that for Dutch Golden Age artists in the 17th century. And it was interesting in the way of a lot of, like, say, Rembrandt, for instance, wasn't actually a real traveler, but the subject matter he painted, and a lot of other Dutch artists that painted things that were exotic to the Netherlands, and it really, in its own subtle way, represented the reach of the Dutch Empire, of Dutch colonialism, and I thought that was pretty interesting. Um, and yeah, so, and like I said just now, like some of the pigments and the materials that were needed to actually create pigments that painted all sorts of things were actually kind of exotic to the Netherlands. And yeah, and we kind of wandered through the Egyptian and Greek sections of the ROM, and that was interesting. So yeah, I've just been doing so much, and even before that, I went to a play, Isaiah Bell, the Book of My Shames, which was I've always enjoyed theater. He's an operatic singer, and when I think of opera, like I just don't know how to think about it. I've never been to opera before, but based on the subject matter of his play, and then knowing that it was going to be, and I've seen YouTube videos of him sing too, but and then based on there's a contemporaneity of the subject matter, but then it's kind of mixed in with this operatic singing. I didn't know what to make of it or how to think about it, and if I was going to enjoy it. But like I said, I tended to think I tended to think that I was going to enjoy it because I tend to enjoy theater. Like I love the live aspect, and he was very engaging. I mean, and I'm going to be very general about this because I don't know how to talk about acting in theater. I don't know how to, but I mean, it's weird the way that he spoke that kind of brought you in and out of reality and what might have been fiction, what might have been real. Maybe I'm the only one that noticed this because I haven't seen any reviews kind of commenting on which parts were fictionalized and which parts were his true life story. But the operatic singing just fit in there, and it worked perfectly. I enjoyed it very much. It was in the Distillery District, and while in the Distillery District, I went to the Thompson Landry Gallery. I went to I forget the name of the gallery, but it's an Indigenous art gallery. I went. I saw some frame pictures of photography that was used in the last Contact Scotiabank Contact Photo Photography Festival. So just a lot of stuff has been happening, and I feel like a lush. I feel just completely saturated in a good way with culture and city life, I'm just very thankful that I have friends around me that are able to provide these things and provide these things that I wouldn't have afforded in any other context or in any other situation. So it's good. It's good. And yeah, so the main point of my video, and I don't want to go on too much about it, but I've also been kind of, I've been struggling along, kind of reading David Benatar's book, Better to Have Never Been, and I'm on the third chapter, which is pretty pathetic. That's pretty pathetic. I've owned the book since the beginning of the month, and I'm on the third chapter, kind of. Um, but his somebody is creating an online archive of his work, and interviews and things like that, on YouTube, specifically speaking. And some of the interviews he does with radio talk shows, with radio talk show hosts, and even debates with, say, people like Jordan Peterson are quite insightful. I find David Benatar to be very direct. Like for a philosopher, and maybe this is a false impression I may have, but I think for philosophers sometimes, and I've read some old school philosophy, you'd think it would be like really fancy, like Zizek, right? Like reading like something like The Monstrosity of Christ. Like, I mean, you like every word deserves its own. Every word in his books deserves like another book dedicated to that word. Um, but yeah, with David Benatar, I find, especially, I don't know too much about his other writings and stuff, but when it comes to antinatalism, he seems very straightforward, direct. What he says makes sense. It doesn't come off as too frilly or too bloated. Like it just makes sense. And a lot of people in the last podcast, not podcast, but radio interview that was uploaded to YouTube, a lot of callers, people that called in were in agreement with him, and I think one or two of them actually said that, directly, in a very explicit way, said that you just make sense. Like forget like the innate sort of survival instinct in human beings. You make sense. Like, I mean, and what I find funny about all of this antinatalist things, all these antinatalist things, is people call in and they say the same argument over and over and over and over again in different ways. See, the problem with people when they hear about antinatalism is they want to think in terms of their existence, their existence, and they can't let go of the fact that if you didn't exist, you wouldn't have any existence to defend or to feel good or bad about. Like, if you didn't exist, you did. If you don't exist, you don't exist. And in reading David Benatar's book, he goes into like a fine detail about like the idea of being in a state of pleasure, or not a state of existence, and then being in a state of non-existence, and how people get. And I kind of struggle with this one as well, but like non-existence is not something to be inside of. Like, it's non-existence. And I'm running into a little bit of a toughie there, trying to figure out what is the argument people are making. It makes, like, I mean, to me it makes sense if I think about it just naturally, like non-existence. But non-existence can't be something that you can be in. Like, there is nothing there. Like, it's a complete void. Like, so there's nothing there. So it brings me up to the point of the video, which I kind of trail off a little bit, but the point of the video uh, and I might even do this video again, to tell you the truth, because I don't know how much sense it's going to make in terms of how I placed everything. But the point of the matter is, like, let's start with existence. Like, yes, and David Benatar acknowledges this like constantly. If you are alive, you want to continue living. That's a given. We all know that. Like, David Benatar knows that. Everybody knows that. Like, you want to live. But there's this idea that keeps coming up, um, about wanting to live, and children that do exist want to live. Yes, that's, like I just said, that's a given. But if a child does not exist, it can't want something. Like, it can't want something. It doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. Like, there's nobody to have any wanting or desires or feelings or pleasures or pains or anything. Like, there's nothing there. But for people who say that based on existing people, children should be born, well, as David Benatar says in his book, there are a lot of wealthy people who can afford a lot of kids with minimal suffering. And, not even philosophically, but morally speaking, they would be bound to basically have as many children as they can afford. But for me, and I haven't heard this. This is a spin-off of the same point, but even people living in poverty, right? Okay, say you have one kid, and because you're supposed to have kids, but you just can't have another kid because based on your financial scenario or situation, you can't support another kid without having that kid suffer. But I bet you, if you live well below the poverty line and you have three, four kids more than you can afford, all four of them will want to live when being born. So what's my point? My point being is we do things that are very anti-natalistic all the time. It's not something that is so like crazily out of bounds and unheard of. Like I mean, I kind of want to say we practice antinatalism in a way. I don't want to say that too strongly because I might be fucking with David Benatar's philosophy a little bit, but we do antinatalist things all the time, and I've mentioned this in other videos. We do practice birth control and family planning and use contraceptives and spermicide and sponges and condoms and all sorts of having your tubes tied and you're having vasectomies and all this stuff, right? Like I mean, we do these things, and if you're doing those things and you think it is morally imperative to have children because that's what we do, then you can look at things like the abortion issue and all the other issues I mentioned and say those people are being immoral. But you know what? Nobody says that. Nobody says, well, except for right wing conservatives and things like that. But like I mean, um, we do these things all the time. So antinatalism, for the bad rap that it gets and all the anger it gets, like I mean, it's undeserved. It really is undeserved. And Jordan Peterson once said, at least I heard him say it once, in his debate with David Benatar, he said that oh, antinatalism is a dangerous way of thinking. I do not think antinatalism is a dangerous way of thinking at all. It is not dangerous, and I know people like Miriam Tuppy at humanprogress.org. And some of these guys are interesting to swallow because because they're well, he works for the Cato Institute, which is funded by the Koch brothers and stuff, but they do make sense and they do back up their methodologies and their for the the ideas that they come up with. They're backed up by statistical data and graphs and historical data, et cetera, and polls and things like that. So it's not it's not difficult to believe them. But when they talk about like basically the dangerously low birth rate or would be low birth rate of countries, they're talking about how degrading it would be, or is that a word? Degrading, degrading. It would be to the quality of human life because I mean we've kind of built up societies on economies of scale, or on societies of scale, basically. And when you think about things like welfare, et cetera, who's going to pay for these things if things go lower? If population numbers drop kind of drastically. But and they think it's dangerous in that way. But I don't. I think it's dangerous in a way if we don't plan for lower populations. And we can't plan for lower populations because nobody believes this anti-natalism stuff. Like nobody, I'm saying that loosely, of course, and you can be creative in how you interpret it, but nobody believes that. Like I mean, we're just going to keep growing in population, like we just will. It seems like something that's so very ethereal, that growth. Like it could just suddenly just vanish like that. But like I mean, in another light, it just seems like what will happen without question. Um, but what I'm saying is if people's mindsets hypothetically were to change when it comes to population and growth and things like that, we would have plans and policy in place to deal with lower population levels. We just would, but nobody's going to plan for that. Nobody will. Um, it's important to say these things, though. I mean, antinatalism just kind of holds this light up against humanity and all existence, basically, and kind of says like, "What the fuck," right? But I think it's interesting to ask those questions and to kind of try to figure out the answers anyway. But yeah, I'll keep reading David Benatar's book, and maybe the next book I buy is "Conscious" by Sam Harris's wife Annika Harris. Um, I think conscious has always been elusive. Consciousness has always been kind of elusive to me as a subject. I tend to slip in this solipsis kind of attitude, um, and I just feel horrible for slipping into it all the time because I know that can't be possible, at least from what I've read. Um, if even if your brain's in a vat, there's still the vat. Where did the vat come from? Like, even if you're the one creating your own pleasures and pains, like who's where are those rules coming from? Like, I mean, there you I mean, you would have to be some sort of like split brain kind of thing going on, and that would mean that you're not the only thing. Like, it's one way or the other. Like, you cannot be the only thing that exists. And like I said in one of my posts, like evolutionarily speaking, you if you lived your life, considering an evolutionary context, in a way that um, supposes that you're the only thing in existence, then you're then you will run up against a lot of danger, a lot of harm, a lot of broken hearts, and a lot of mental anguish. You just will. I mean, maybe on a philosophical level, you could start talking about solipsism and things like that. But I don't see how that could be true, but I can understand how people can fall into the suave kind of like understanding of everything is subjective and things like that. It sounds really cool. It's been used in movies and pop culture a lot, to the point where I think it's kind of embedded in the psyche now that everything is subjective and blah blah blah. Like, it just sounds really cool. But you know what? I think antinatalism sounds cooler. Not that I advocate for antinatalism, because it just sounds cool, but I think it just makes sense. Anyway, that was a rambly video. I don't know if I'll do it again. I feel like I kind of put a whole bunch of shit together, and hopefully it makes sense. But like, I mean, we'll see. Um, I think there's a certain flow to it, if only it was just a superficial feel or something. Anyway, that's about it. Bye.